Welcome to Women Making News Live. I'm your host, Demi Hicks, and it is exciting today to be able to share the topic of work-life integration. To explore this most critical topic, we've gone out to the experts and the scholars, and our special guests represent that. Joining us today is Dr. Anna Briggs Kleckner and Dr. Heather Britt. Heather, share a bit about yourself with our audience.
Thanks, Demi, and super excited to be here. Heather Britt, I'm with the Wilder Foundation in St. Paul, Minnesota, specifically with Wilder Research. Trained as a behavioral epidemiologist, have done work across the healthcare footprint, across community-based organizations and state agencies, thinking about, in part, how they can improve the work that they do to support the humans in those organizations and to support the humans that they may be serving. I've also been thinking a lot about community-based research and development in a number of sectors over the years.
All right, good. Thank you. I'm just so pleased that you're here and that you're with us and that you are joining Anna Kleckner. Anna, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. And I'm so happy to be here with friends who I love working with anytime I can. So Anna Kleckner, a little about me. I have a background in public health systems research, design, and policy, academically and in practice. And then for the past 10 years, I've been really serving as an internal consultant at a variety of healthcare companies, helping them standardize practices that focus on consumers as well as employees. And so some of that work is related to work-life integration, which is why I'm here today.
All right, good. Thank you. Thank you both. And just for clarification, the two of you know each other well. Am I right on that?
Yes. We had a great opportunity to work together at a large provider organization in Minnesota, Alina Health. And then when I was at Blue Cross of Minnesota was fortunate enough to be able to recruit Anna into that organization. So yeah, we've been in circles periodically over time. Both have kiddos. Anna's a little younger, mine kind of late teen ages. So I think have both a professional connection as well as a personal connection.
All right, great. Well, that makes this even more special. So that's good. Work-life integration. You don't go anywhere without reading about it, without hearing about it. Executive leadership is most interested in it. Our employees and people across the scope are interested in it. Let's start by, Anna, with you. And the question of, so that we're all aligned and we all have the same context here, describe work-life integration as you and Heather might explore it today.
Definitely. So when I think about work-life integration and what I sort of preach about, practice about in that context is really about the harmonization and ability of workers to align their work and their life in whatever way makes the most sense for them. And so it's a little bit different from work-life balance. It's conceptually different in that balance is really the outcome that organizations try to enable through separation of work and life. And so they might create, for example, a 4-day work week versus a 5-day. So whereas integration is really about enabling workers to produce the results that they need to do regardless of how they get there, and have a greater focus on individual autonomy and flexibility. So you get to kind of choose when and how you work.
Oh, okay, good. And Heather, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about sort of maximizing engagement in any part of your life and sort of minimizing what I'll call burnout. So minimizing those sort of demands that we just can't meet. So trying to find that sweet spot, I think for individuals outside of their working experiences and inside their working experiences.
Yeah, okay, good. And what, how serious is this issue? Again, I said that it's in the narrative today. So how serious is the issue, and who is it impacting the most? Heather?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're at the point of it being, sort of wildly serious. I sort of say to healthcare, it's not just a bedroom that's on fire, the entire house is on fire. So, I think it's something we used to see a lot in healthcare, sort of this mismatch, this imbalance, this lack of engagement because of the stressors that were put on that set of individuals. The expectations and the absence of the right kinds of supports. We're now seeing it across all different kinds of sectors. It is costing us, somewhere in the neighborhood of $190 billion a year in sort of healthcare costs and impact on the workforce. It's got health impacts, misaligned and sort of disengaged humans, I think we all know, show up differently in their personal spaces. And that takes a toll, and they show up differently in their professional spaces, and that takes a toll. And so those impacts, those sort of universal impacts, are increasingly significant. I think we knew we had a problem before the pandemic, and I think really the pandemic has accelerated the fact that employers, communities, organizations, families have to start thinking about this in a different kind of way.
Yeah, so society.
Right.
Society as a whole, as you just describe it, is impacted and affected by this.
Right.
And so if we were to take one segment of that society, and you both have touched on it here already, but what role does this play for employers? Heather?
Yeah, I'll use the sort of, I'm a big fan of Christina Maslach, who's sort of the, what I'll call kind of the godmother of thinking about engagement and burnout. She started studying psychiatrists and psychologists back in the 70s, starting to sort of understand this. And she uses the canary analogy, sort of you send the canary into the coal mine. If they come out sick, it wasn't the canary that did it. It was the coal mine that did it. And so while it is critically important for humans to feel like they can sort of co-create the world within which they have the right kind of resilience, it's also really important for employers to realize that we are often the ones producing a lack of resilience in our humans. And so really the problem starts with us, which means a lot of the response needs to start with us, needs to start with leadership, how we think about systems and structures, how we think about the supports that we put in place for humans that are working in these environments, and the amount of flexibility, autonomy, variety, professional development that we can offer the humans who are in these workforce environments.
Yeah, so I want to focus on the humans there that you just paused with, but you just said a lot. And what comes up for me in listening to that is, wow, where do we start?
Right.
And is it possible to make progress in something that in less than 5 minutes the two of you have already described as just so critical and so important? But Anna, let's talk about the individual, and what can they do inside and outside of their relationship with their employer? What can they do for themselves moving towards work-life integration? And I see you post a lot on LinkedIn, and I just have such an appreciation for not only your experience and your commitment and knowledge to this, but your sense of humor that you brought in there. So I'd like you to do two things here. Is one, let's talk about the individual and what they can do. And then I'd like you to share the importance of you bringing the lightness and the sense of humor to this critical topic.
Oh man, there's so much I want to respond. Thank you for the compliment on being funny. I think, so kind of just touching on the individual, but really thinking about it as a system, right, that impacts an individual. So kind of back to like the previous question about, who's most impacted. Well, this is, starting with community, because community is full of industries and occupations, right? And so there are some industries and occupations that are impacted by this more than others. So work-life integration in it of itself is like not necessarily cannot be optimized fully in certain roles, right? So it's not always appropriate to have, based on the work, right, to have true autonomy and how and when you do your job. Some jobs just don't allow for that. And so I want to make that clear that work-life integration isn't, full work-life integration isn't always possible. However, I do believe that employers, industries, and possibly lawmakers, I don't know, I don't want to go that far, they're obligated really to think about how we can work differently and how we can enable this into individuals' lives, right? So setting that context that this is a systematic, comprehensive, social, ecological, sort of multifaceted concept, right? That is iterative through small tests of change over time. So I just wanted to also throw that out there. But at the individual level, there's kind of like two types of individuals that I like to talk about related to work-life integration. One type of individual is the worker who this was forced upon them based on circumstance, right? We talk about COVID pandemic mandated this. It did not give us a choice, right? It gave us a choice, but out of survival, we had to learn collectively as individuals and as employers how to do this and keep the lights on, not only in our companies, but in our homes. And so it was a really great experiment, learning opportunity for us to enable true innovation and how we can do this. It also gave individuals and employers opportunities to know what's possible and know what they want and prefer. And so now we know talent crisis, people are hop and ship, they're deciding what matters to them. And so what matters to some people now is the ability to harmonize and to be autonomous in how they do their work. And so work-life integration looks a little bit differently depending on what context you're in.
Yeah, that was helpful. And what stays with me across many topics in society is and cultures across the world is this idea of privilege. And when I look across the corporate spectrum here, and I look at what's happened over the course of the last 2 years, and Annie, you were just touching on that. Is work-life integration only for the privileged? And what would you do with that question?
Well, I think it's a really good question, and I think we could definitely have a whole session on that very question. So I'll start with
Let's
that.
have it.
Yeah, so that we can definitely, I think that's really one, from a public health perspective to really dig deep and dive into it. But what I'll comment on right now about it is, as I mentioned before, work-life integration is really more amenable to certain occupations and industries, which have ways of working and types of systems around them. So when it comes to availability and to having this, I think companies can reduce disparities in their workforce around work-life integration by making sure that they are doing all that they can do to accommodate life events, accommodate preferences where it impacts family without a lot of paperwork, so to speak. So there are ways that companies can really enable work-life integration without, some of the things that we do in the corporate world, do.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of quotes high level because it is more amenable in that type of setting.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I'd say now companies, because of remote availability and ability to work literally anywhere in the world, I think that's opened up a lot of opportunities for people to have types of roles and occupations that they maybe didn't have access to before the pandemic, for example, or before we knew how productive companies could be when they were allowing this. So I think it's, again, a whole conversation we should be having. And that's my perspective.
Yeah, so let's stay there for a couple of minutes, Anna, and kind of take a side note here with the now employees, many employees now having the opportunity to work virtually and how that has changed their life. But what about the flip side of this? And Heather, I'd like you to tap in here too. What about the flip side of that, where, and you see this written about, where employees need that engagement, they need that face-to-face. So there are all of those who have prospered from being able to work virtually and being at home and remotely. I have a nephew who I adore, who works in 4 different places because he can. Mm-hmm. And that's a great thing. But what about that person that needs to be in the conference room with 4 other people and engaged face to face? What do you say about that?
I mean, I think what's important to know is that kind of we sort of imagined, it's going to be better when folks are at home. And if they have that sort of opportunity to be at home, we see about the same level of stress and about the same level of burnout, no matter where folks are working, whether it's in the physical workspace or whether it's in that sort of virtual environment. So that need for connection, that need for mattering, that need for meaningfulness exists in both of those environments and those ecosystems. And so I think it's important for, employers, organizations, institutions to be thinking about that, sort of connection and community that has to matter at work, whether that is online or that is in person. What are those valuable social connections that exist? Yeah. Where are those places for those connections to foster growth, professional development, new meaning, new attachment? And what are employers doing to foster those kind of connections for humans outside of the screen or outside of the physical workspace, right? So enough room and enough space to be able to engage in community and connection with family, with loved ones in community, with friends. So being really clear that that connection for individuals, we know even more after the last 3 years, matters substantially in the health of humans. So looking to workforces to say, yep, I own making sure you've got meaningful connection in all the ways you may show up. Even though I'm reinforcing, I want you to be able to show up in the way you want. I've still got to own that that's part of what I need to be a steward of as an employer. But I also have to reinforce for you, for your nephew, for you, Demi, for you, Anna, the opportunity to do that connection outside of the work ecosystem. My job's to reinforce that because that makes you better when you show up in the screen or in the building.
Yeah. So, Heather, I know you shared about the organization that you are the executive director of, but could you remind me here, because I've lost it, do organizations bring you in, bring your organization in to help them work on these very issues we're discussing and work-life integration?
Yeah, so we've started some of that. I've been in the seat as the executive director for our research division about 5 months. So since this is one of my research passions, it's certainly one of my practice passions. So we partner with nonprofits, we partner with healthcare, we partner with a variety of organizations to help them think about their own internal community indicators, to think about what we know about community. And then we also help them think about the programs they may be deploying. Is it having the kind of effect they're looking for? So in my mind, this is another one of those opportunities to help employers, organizations, nonprofits think about, all right, what's the kind of environment I'm creating for all of the humans that I'm stewards of as employees or stewards of as members, patients, community members, and what am I doing as an organization to be able to enable those humans to thrive? What are the things I want to tune, and how do I want to understand if that's working or if that's not working?
Right. Okay.
And I would add too, Demi, like, what do the people want, right? Like, what matters to the individuals, but collectively across the org, knowing it's going to be very different. So it's really about work-life integration. To me, is about enabling autonomy where it makes sense. and having that freedom, enabling the choice and the freedom based on those individual preferences, knowing that that's going to be really hard. And there's not like one thing you can do that's going to be work-life integration. So it's about the mindset, it's about the concept, it's about process, strategy, and tactics, right? That collectively, build that as part of the culture of the company.
So Anna, can I ask you a question about your role within your organization?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, good. So is that the things that you just described, are those the things that you work on within your organization, and what's the progress that's being made is probably of more interest to me.
Well, I will say that I chose to work for a company that does work-life integration really well. I think that they had some trials and tribulations across the pandemic, just like everyone else. And they learned and they responded to that learning by creating a very clear and visible support for employees to either work on site, 8 to 5 if they want, or work from home, kind of it's flexibility. And so I intentionally chose that because that matters to me personally. But the company has done a very nice job in allowing the autonomy. And I know it's been a journey, and a lot of that comes down to the leadership that they have built up in that company. And so it's not something I do directly in my current role, although my role is related to that. It's more my side gig at work. I'm not a work-life integration consultant, but I play one at work. So
I love how you set the expectation for your employer always through the way you post, through the way you show up at work, right? Part of this is a dynamic, as you noted, back and forth between employer and employees. You yourself as a leader get to stand up and model all of that, get to make sure the folks around you sort of see those patterns that you've instituted in your own life. And that matters for the employer to see, and it matters for your peers to actually be able to watch and witness, whether it's the thing you're doing 8 to 5 or not, right? It's the modeling that you're setting, which I think is so exciting for the organization you're currently with, and all the humans around you.
Yeah, great.
And it's a great recruitment strategy, right? Like people want this, the top talent that maybe were cautious about really fully entering the workforce, specifically women, some women and other maybe older workers. There's a lot of segments that are really embracing this, and there's some top talent out there that companies could be missing out on if they're not really thinking about this. So
yeah,
I got to say so myself. So.
and you just did. That's good. Yeah. Heather, what do you, so we've spent a little bit of time on a very big, massive topic, but what do you want our audience to know that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably a couple of things. I think as we think about kind of work-life harmony, work-life integration, I think folks can struggle for a few reasons. They can struggle because they've just got too much going on, right? So that kind of overwhelmed, too much demand struggle. They can struggle because they've been a little bit neglected. So, they're not engaged in tasks that help them thrive. They've not got those relationships outside of work that help them thrive. So sort of the misalignment or being burned out or struggling in this space shows up in different ways. It's not always kind of being emotionally exhausted, right? It could be, I feel a really low sense of personal accomplishment. I don't feel like I'm getting stuff done. It could feel like, I'm not excited about what I'm doing. I don't feel like I can solve any problems. So it kind of shows up in lots of different ways. So folks who may be struggling, you may be struggling with some of this and just not either have the language or the characterization to be able to sort of hold on to it. So that's one thing I want folks to know. It shows up in a lot of different forms.
Yeah.
I also think what's important for folks to know is there's a lot of frameworks and a lot of movement nationally to start to help us, what I say in Minnesota, get our loons in a row, get our ducks in a row as organizations and communities to start to think about, it's not sort of totally unknown what we ought to be doing. There's some paths, there's some ways to walk down sort of the sort of path. The National Academy of Medicine has a whole bunch of information. The Surgeon General's office just released sort of a framework for, if I care about mental health of my workforce and well-being of my workforce, what do I need to commit to? So there are those things out there that leaders, frontline leaders, mid-level leaders, senior leaders can grab onto and start to use as ways they might consider guideposts for the ways their organization wants to evolve. So that's exciting that we're starting to say, we've got a problem, we've got things we're struggling with. Here's some resources and some ways to start to discover, uncover, walk through, and sort of enable a different way toward addressing those problems.
Heather, I recognize that this is your scholarship, this is your life's work, and I'm going to ask this question anyway. So, is it possible to make significant progress when an issue is as big as this one, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the sort of hopeful optimist in me says it's got to be possible because we don't have any choice, right? When we look at, particularly in the healthcare ecosystem, 1 in 5 nurses left the profession in the last 3 years. So we've got we have a pretty significant crisis. So the upside is there's lots of us in it trying to figure this all out together.
Yeah.
And we know from the literature, and I think Anna and I both know just from practical experience, it is possible to create that balance, that integration, that harmony. It is possible to create an ecosystem where folks thrive. We know some of those steps, some of those things. We've watched our peer organizations do some of this work together, but it does, as Anna noted, require that employees be engaged and the leadership inside their organizations be engaged together, and that we set those expectations of our institutions. I'm setting that of my church, I'm setting that of my employer, I'm setting that of my son's high school and my involvement there, that we get to set those expectations, those edges, those boundaries, those things that are going to help all of us involved in that work together thrive. We're not off the hook, as we think about all those different parts of our life. And yes, the upside is we do know we can get better at this, and we've also got to get better at this.
Yeah. And I want to ask you the same question and make the statement that I recognize this is your scholarship too, and that you've spent a career in some form or fashion in this area. But why is go deeper here with me? Why is this important to you personally?
So personally, I just want to help companies and people be the best they can be. Now, that sounds really lofty and pie in the sky, but it's really about maximizing sort of reducing waste even. I'm concerned about the talent crisis and all the waste that I do see with some of my peers, and just especially I'm biased towards women because I know that's a big area that I've seen. And I want companies to know what's possible and help them get there. And so there are evidence-based practices out there. There are methods out there. Companies are already doing this, right? There are companies and areas that are thriving in this space. So I think it's just a matter of understanding what it is, how it's conceptually different from work-life balance, which is another thing, right? It's related, but it's really just being really mindful and intentional about it, asking and listening to your employees, taking a data-driven approach a little bit to make sure that you are actually tackling a problem that there is to solve. You might be doing great and therefore you don't need work-life integration, right? Just So I answered maybe a few of your unasked questions there, but for me, it's just about like really fully maximizing what's possible. And it's so possible to have a really fulfilled career and a really fulfilled life. And really they should be in harmony. So
Yeah, it's beautiful. That might be just the right place to bring this conversation to a close on the word harmony. But I will state that I think pointing out that there is to leaders, that there is a difference between, this is what I learned from you today, that there is a difference between work-life balance and work-life integration. And I just appreciate both of you. And again, I appreciate your commitment to your field and to this incredibly important life thriving area that you both work in, and the work that you do. And Women Making News wants to support you in your efforts in any way that we can. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you,
thanks for
Demi.
having me. Thank you.
Yeah.